and here we are, our panelists for the next session. It's funny, we go from being behind schedules to now being slightly ahead of it. And so here the panel will actually be moderated by IX's Mr. Priyank Tiwari, who's Senior Director of Research Advisory and Government Relations, IIX. We also have Fakhrul Aufa, who's Head of SDG 1 Indonesia at PT Sarana Multi-Infrastructure, PTSMI. Ms. Charlotte Camille Chow Türk, who's Asia Green Investment Lead at the Global Green Growth Institute, Indonesia. Bapak Wibowo, Chief Financial Officer at Indonesia Infrastructure Finance, and Bapak Erlangga Atmadja, Director of Infrastructure Advisory at KPMG. Please, welcome to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, George, and it's a pleasure to be here and to moderate this, what promises to be a very exciting panel looking at infrastructure and how do you make infrastructure a lot more inclusive. Allow me to set a bit of a context. So infrastructure is often measured by the dollars invested or the projects delivered. But when you look at financing real economy, you need to see how infrastructure can be made a lot more inclusive, looking at how infrastructure benefits women, communities, and how it's a lot more socially inclusive. Infrastructure is still, for most countries, the biggest public expenditure. And yet, it does not factor in gender considerations, it does not factor in inclusion and communities. It does not make women part of the whole green financing solution. So perhaps one way is to see how do we actually not look at projects in isolation, but instead look at projects as a value chain that benefits communities, benefits women, and therefore is able to make the financing a lot more inclusive and a lot more gender integrated. So I would invite the panelists to think on these lines, on how do we make financing a lot more inclusive when we look at infrastructure and not the hard projects alone. How do we really look at cross-thematic synergies across social, gender, green, orange, and what's the way forward for that? So I invite all the panelists to put their thinking hats on and share some insights on what you've been seeing in the market and how do you see this evolving. With that context, perhaps I'll start with Fakhrul. So for those of you who don't know, I know that Fakhrul wears many hats. He is, of course, at PT SMI, and PT SMI is one of the largest infrastructure financing companies in Indonesia. He's also managing SDG Indonesia 1, which is a blended finance platform driving collaboration and financing. So Fakhrul, just drawing from the different roles that you play, and given I know how active you are in the market, what do you see as the current state of infra financing in Indonesia? And are you actually seeing any existing solutions that are looking at mainstreaming gender and climate resilience in infrastructure? If you could just help us set that context, that'll be wonderful.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Pak Priyank, and also IIX for inviting us to this very prestigious event to actually share our insight for this. First of all, I think I would like to start from saying that inclusive is actually a spirit that can be separated from the financing infrastructure itself. Because we have to understand that building infrastructures means that you are not only building a solid or a hard infrastructure, but also how you can also involve stakeholders, involve society, involve people living nearby the project location to be able to participate in the infrastructures. So that's why in PTSMI we've seen this kind of integrating inclusivity and gender in our company by actually preparing our institution first, because we think that making the, I would say, the readiness of the institution is much more important before you can actually implement this to other company to actually following your pathway. So that's why in 2020 in PTSMI we starting to start the journey of how we actually implementing comprehensive gender equity and social inclusion framework. So for all of the projects that we actually finance, so we are actually implementing the assessment that is not only seeing the environmental and social safeguard of the project, but also how we can actually see the readiness of the company to be able to implement gender and social inclusion. We actually putting some scoring on this, like 5 score for the first one is, do they or the company is actually know about gender and social inclusion? If they know, do they aware about this? How actually they are creating internal mechanism for that? Or after they're aware, do they have a commitment to implement that? After they commit, can they actually progressing on this? After they're progressing, can they deliver? So the highest rank is they can deliver the programs. So the fact that we are actually facing that not all of the company actually are ready or even have a commitment in terms of the internal company policies, so on and so forth. So that's why we actually feels that there is kind of a support needed for that. So that's why the second thing that we bring is the catalytic finance, where we actually using our SDG Indonesia 1, we bring not only financing but also technical assistance to help the companies in order to understand what is actually and how actually they can integrate gender and social inclusion in the infrastructure planning of their project. So which is actually important to be able to understand and implement this in making the inclusivity of the projects itself. We've seen in the context of Indonesian development at the moment is already on track, and we got a very good momentum as of today. Maybe you've seen that Indonesia issuing the inaugurations of Orange Bond, for example. It means that the commitment of the government is there. As now, I think it's part of the role of PTSMI as a DFI also to promote it, to make more the company actually, integrate and start to implement this kind of inclusivity in the project design and also project development. So I think maybe that's to start the context of how we actually can help the company to actually implement the social inclusion and gender in the project level.
Well, thank you for that, Fakhrul. Good context in looking at how you're implementing it within PT SMI itself, and then bringing in the platform to actually see how the gaps can be bridged as well. And that's a good segue for me to actually go to Charlotte from GGGI. Now, GGGI plays in the entire spectrum of green financing value chain, right from looking at the policy support, the issuer support, you're looking at technical assistance as well as implementation support as well. So drawing from what Fakhrul also mentioned in terms of looking at how does the assistance come in, what are the current gaps, are they aware, not aware? Are there any insights into how this is actually being implemented? You work a lot with issuers, not only in Indonesia, in your broader regional node, you work with a lot of issuers in different Asian countries, including Vietnam and other markets. Are there any insights you can share from with us on how they are doing it in the other markets?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I think when we think about gender and infrastructure and how we, address it, it's different when you actually do the implementation. So I'll share with you some of the experience that we had. In Pacific, I'll just explain. In Fiji, we do have a project. We identified that one of the reasons why off-grid solar doesn't work or is not sustainable because the communities doesn't know how to properly maintain and operate the infrastructure. But then, so we had a project that would cater to that. We have the modules prepared and we will go to the communities and teach them. Then we went there and we figured out that most of the men are not in the villages anymore because they are hired in New Zealand and Australia to do fruit picking. So now the question is, does our module cater to just women to do the monitoring and evaluation? And the answer is a little bit. It's not fully integrated, right? So in terms of capacity building and policy, are we thoughtful enough to actually integrate gender and inclusivity in all of the things that we do? The answer is not yet, right? So we need to actually improve on that. Another example I'll share with you is one of our projects in PNG. So we are looking at a sustainable road infrastructure project. And we are the one writing the concept note to be submitted to GCF. And we are working with engineers who also are not gender experts. So our role is to how we can integrate gender into the design, into the concept note. So we look for ways to integrate, and the answer is you have to put, sidewalk vendor area. But then we realize that, in PNG, security risk is very high. So the standards doesn't apply to every country. And that's always the issue with, projects in different countries. They don't localize the implementation of this project and how you integrate it. And it's very critical to actually localize that. I've seen only few donors that actually require localization in their, KPI requirements or reporting. And that's very critical because if we don't localize, every gender, every community will have different issues or different challenges. And it seems like, it's not enough that we just use a certain standard. We have to make sure that it's actually integrated to the right community. And the last one would be, so I've worked in the Philippines for a long time in renewable energy, and one of the favorite projects that I usually do is Runoff River. And previously, in 2013, I wouldn't even know that gender is included in the social work that we've done, right? So the issue is more like we cannot value the gender, benefits of those projects. And we have feed-in tariff in Philippines for Runoff River. Until now, it's not fully subscribed. And it's because we cannot value the gender and community aspect that could actually flow in as a blended capital, blended financing for us. And so, it's always difficult to really put in the real work into the actual reality. So I think we need to do more in terms of valuing this impact, and so we can communicate to the financiers, to the developers, and to the development partners and government on how to actually address and integrate gender and inclusivity in infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. So localization, I think, was a key highlight for me. That you need to localize. You can't just simply replicate models blindly across countries, and the fact that you actually need capacity support for that to happen. So that, I think, those are really good insights. With those insights on how it's actually evolving and working, if I may bring in an issuer perspective from PAERI. PAERI, IIF is a very active infrastructure sector financing company. You support sectors right from roads, water, waste, to even green projects. And you're also an active bond issuer, conventional and thematic bonds. So with your unique insight as an issuer in Indonesia and the gaps that Charlotte and Fakhrul highlighted, how are you looking at the domestic green bond or green financing market in Indonesia? Are there any specific supply side or demand side trends and challenges that you're seeing around infrastructure bonds or green focus bonds? And what's the way forward looking like for you on that?
Thank you, Priyank. Thank you for inviting us to be the panelists of this excellent forum with these ladies and gentlemen. And as you know that IF is already issued two thematic bonds. The first one in 2021, we issued a sustainable global bond amounting to 150 million. And the second one, in 2023, we issue green perpetual notes amounting to around 335 billion. So we have experience in issuing both sustainable and also a green bond. If you take a look at the local domestic market, between 2022 and 2025, I think there are around 22 thematic bond issuance in Indonesia with the total amount of around 36 trillion. That represents around, I think, 8% of the total volume. And it's still low compared to other regions. If you compare to Asia, for example, Asia is between 6 to 14% of the total bond issuance, and even lower compared to global bond issuance. I think it's around 12 to 16%. So the number is still low, so I think there's still room to grow the market. There are still some issues, both from the supply and demand side. If you take a look at the supply side, the main issue, I think, is the limited project that can be matched as an underlying for the bond issuance. And then also lack of incentive. If you take a look at the cost, issuance for the monitoring, for the reporting, for the certification, it can add to around 15 to 20 bips. So that makes the issuance of the thematic bond less attractive, from the cost standpoint. And also, I think from the demand side, we see a lack of investor base. Still limited in terms of the demand from the asset managers, pension fund, or the insurance companies. So, but based on that fact, I think one of the key issues to tackle those challenges, I think as a country, we have to develop more and more bankable green projects as an underlying. For example, IF is contemplating to issue a blue bond, but we find it difficult to find a matching underlying project for us to get the suitable size for the issuance. And also, I think we need to add more incentive for the issuer. Can be in form of the tax incentive or maybe a subsidy to reduce costs. I discussed earlier with Pak Fakhrul. I think Pak Fakhrul can also explain, actually one of the PTSMI plan to reduce the cost of the issuance. And then also from the regulatory side, the government can be more proactive in issuing thematic bonds. I think if you learn from the lesson learned from the countries such as Korea, China, and European Union, the government is very active in issuing thematic bonds, and then corporate will follow. I think that also one of the ways to grow the investment.
Thank you, Pa Eri. I think that very well outlines what the practical on-ground challenges are on supply and demand of capital, and we also need to figure out the right solution for it. If the underlying projects is a challenge, if low investor base is a challenge, how do you build the narrative and make it more sort of inclusive in a way that you're able to open up new investor base, or perhaps you're able to redefine the way you're looking at projects. So I think those are solutions we all need to collectively identify, but you very well laid out the practical gaps and challenges that an issuer faces in Indonesia. With that, I want to go to Pa Erlangga. You are in a very unique position where you are an advisor and you also look at the overall ecosystem, where you look at different projects that are being designed, you look at risk assessment parameters, you look at what advocacy is happening, and you also have a global network across the region. With that context and that perspective, are there any best practices or models that you're seeing in the region that Indonesia could benefit from? Or perhaps even the other way, maybe you're seeing something in Indonesia that the region can benefit from. But how are you looking at infrastructure really integrating gender considerations, integrating climate resilience, community impact into project financing? How does that looking like for you?
Thank you, Pak Priyank, for inviting us. And to answer your question, I think I would quote Professor Duran in the Orange Forum in 2024, where she said that there cannot be green without orange, right? So if you have that design in mind, when we talk to it could be anyone, right? We can talk to the project proponents, it could be the project owner, it could be the sponsor. But if you have that sense that the design itself needs to incorporate the locality, like what Charlotte mentioned, because at the end of the day, from the perspective of the investor, what they look at is that why this needs to be combined is because you need to manage the risk. So the locality aspect, effectively you manage the risk there. And by doing so, you also tap into opportunities. So it goes both ways, right? So if you have that framework in mind, you start to influence the whole ecosystem. So if that affects the whole ecosystem and you can think alike, then you can identify where the gaps are. And we tend to look at the gaps based on a continuum from the demand of infrastructure finance to the supply of infrastructure finance. And the unique position in this case, what Fakhrul is doing, is the process of intermediation, the blending process. So if you have that end-to-end, and if you have people having the same understanding, it will not be a fad. It is an actual, genuine investor concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Paanga. And I think it's interesting that you have already very well summarized the panel, which is there's no green without orange. But I think just picking from the context that has been set by all of you, we want to also make it a lot more about action. With these gaps and with this landscape, what is our call to action in this room today with all the partner stakeholders here? How do we work toward addressing this gap now? So just to pick from what Fakhrul said in terms of looking at gender mainstreaming mandates, looking at capacity and technical assistance that is needed, Charlotte, who spoke about examples that need localization, adaptation. Pa Eri actually spoke about how there are these practical gaps in the market. Okay, and from your perspective, really looking at that bigger opportunity to bring orange into green. Given all of this, if I may ask each one of you to provide a call to action, maybe in the form of an approach that Indonesia needs to adopt or the region needs to adopt, perhaps a role that you envision for a stakeholder, could be a development partner, could be policymaker, could be issuer, or perhaps even the kind of instruments or thematic labels we need to embrace to look at infra as a more inclusive value chain of a project, rather than only, as Fakhrul said, hard infrastructure. So if I may go the other way around and start with you this time, Paanga, on what is that call to action for the room today?
Okay.
That we all need to commit to.
Thank you. So since the panel is represented through the entire continuum, I'll start with the demand side of finance. So this means that project owners, when they design the project, they need to think innovatively. Meaning, if you can have an intersection of infrastructures, you can actually increase the value. Let me tell you what I mean. Like, for instance, a lot of the orange bond type of financing works in social infrastructures, like water. What happens if you leverage that by design to also go through, let's say, climate smart agriculture? Because water, irrigation, and then that. So if you create that type of innovative design, you can actually combine aspects of commercial with the social. So, from the design, I think we need to think more broadly. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Panga, that's very good insight and a very specific example which potentially would give us a new way of thinking as well. Pa Eri, if we have to translate this into how you now look at this as an issuer, is that something that's really feasible, where you can actually look at projects that way and say that, okay, let's look at water, for instance, and then look at the whole infrastructure value chain around water and see what are those bigger infra projects that IF can actually support, and therefore make the projects by design more inclusive, by design bringing in community and women. How does that look like for you in your portfolio, current portfolio, or your prospective portfolio?
From our side, whenever we provide loan to the companies, we always implement the IFC performance standard. So basically, because IFC is our shareholders, one of our shareholders, then we adopt the IFC performance standard in our loan. So basically, for us, any project has to comply with those social and environmental standard, global standard. And I agree with Pa Erlangga said, yeah. I think one of the key reasons for us as an issuer is we have to, as a country, we have to develop the bankable green project. I think that's one of the key initiatives that we have to develop. Otherwise, government can provide incentive and can provide any regulation that can support the demand, but if there is no project, then there is no bond issuance. I think that's the key factor.
And to also just touch upon the point you made previously in terms of demand and supply. When you say there is lower domestic investor base, and there is also a challenge in finding the right underlying, what are the solutions around that? Is the solution looking at better linkages with international capital markets, or looking at more cross-cutting thematic labels which still achieve your goal of infrastructure focus and financing, but in a way that the label allows you to open up a new segment of investors, potentially orange and more socially inclusive labels? Is that something that you're also considering, and is that really practical?
Yeah, for us, international investor is always going to be one of our key source of fund. And also, I think that can be done is persuade government to implement some sort of a minimum ESG investment, I think, for asset managers or pension fund or insurance. I think a few years ago, government has implemented certain amount of infrastructure investment for the asset managers and pension fund and insurance. So I think can be done in different way. So maybe green investment will do. Can be one of the way to increase demand, I think, from the market.
Thank you. Busha, you spoke a lot about localization. What are those specific pain points when you actually work with the issuers, okay? And how are you addressing them? If you see pain points around capacity, understanding of gender inclusion, understanding of community inclusion, how do you actually address these pain points?
Yeah, thank you. When we think about not just green sometimes, social, gender inclusivity, this requirements has some additional cost, right? It's an incremental cost to any developer. But the issue is not applying, so they will comply. But the question is that the right compliance, right? Because these things, it becomes more of symbolic than functional. And if you're not actually addressing the right, design to your technical design, or then it doesn't make use of the actual community. So I think that's one of the pain points for issuers is that they wanted to save costs. They wanted to get financing. They wanted to finance project, but do they have the capacity to actually check if the implementation is correct or the application is right? And I think that's where we need to come in and support them on how they actually can do that by reaching out to the communities themselves, understanding the women's issues and the community's issues, and actually applying that to the design of the project. I think that's one very important thing that we need to figure out and support the issuer side.
Thank you. Fakhrul, again, you spoke a lot about how you leverage both what SMI does and how the platform comes in, SDG Indonesia 1. When we talk about gender mainstreaming and making infrastructure inclusive, and of course with all the initiatives you have done around scoring and capacity, these things are easier said than done, right? Because there's a lot of effort when you're talking to infrastructure financing companies or project financing companies. They often have a perspective of only looking at projects as a project, as a hard project, and then jumping from one project to the other to the other. Okay? So practically, how do you actually implement it? I mean, is there a way that you help them look at, okay, who are going to be the beneficiaries of this project? How is the community engaged in that project? What happens after project is done? How does the tracking, monitoring happen around social indicators or gender indicators? So is there a practical guide that you think works in your experience?
Thank you, Priyank, for bringing this question. I think, yes, in PTSMI now we are piloting one of the projects that we finance about water projects. We finance 12.5 million US dollars, which are actually water treatment plants producing around 2,600 liters per second. The interesting point of this project is we are helping the clients in order to understand how they can actually integrate gender and social inclusion in the project levels. So we actually deploy technical assistance, we deploy our consultant helping the clients to talk with the community living nearby the projects, what is actually their needs to actually benefiting from the projects. Some of the actually, concerns about the community is, for example, can be recruited as an employee in the project company level. So these kind of things can be happens because as people living nearby the project, sometimes they expect to be recruited, they expect to get some benefits directly, but sometimes a company doesn't want to hear about this, right? So that makes the project unsustainable. So that's why we help the client to understand if there is any concern about this, how can you address? How can you actually, not maybe solving at that time, but actually you have a step to improve the capacity of people living nearby the project location, to improve their education, to improve their skills, and one day they can be recruited to work in your company. So that's how actually we are doing to be able to implement this in the project levels. So I think that's maybe one of the examples as a DFI we are trying to promote this into the ecosystem. The other examples is that, answering your question about call to action, now we are discussing with government of Indonesia, with OJK, and also with the donors to create an incentive mechanisms for issuers when a company would like to issue thematic bonds, including green, social, and sustainability bonds. Because all of the speakers also mentioned about additional costs. So we are thinking how actually we can incentivize to reduce the additional costs for certifications or monitoring or even reporting to be able to promote the market. Because we've seen from the regulatory point of view, the regulators, especially OJK, already push and encourage the demand side. They actually issue some regulation to be able to, institutional investors to look for more asset. But we know that the problems is there is a limited instruments in the market now. So that's why the gap is how actually we can reduce the cost of issuing. So that's why we are going to launch this kind of around 7.6 million US dollars programs in order to promote more issuance on thematics, including orange bonds. If you would like to be, supported by this incentive, we are replicating the models where this is actually happening in Singapore. So we do hope it can promote more thematic and institutional investor investment for the thematic sectors like gender and social inclusion.
Thank you, Fakhrul. That is music to my ears, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience would be very pleased to hear that. I do have one question here that has come in online, but I quickly want to check with the audience if anybody has any question they want to ask any of the panelists. Okay, then I'm going to go to the question we have online. It's a very interesting one, so I'm going to read it as it is. It says, how do you manage the dissonance between the ambitions and reality on the ground? Partly what Pa Eri and Bouchard are also referring to. Lots of projects aren't ready, but the money is there. First of all, is that true? And if that's the case, then how do you bridge this gap or manage this gap? So is there something that any of you would like to take a crack at?
Thank you. I'll take a first crack. And yeah, it's a valid question that represents what's happening in real terms, right? So what we can do is that we need to look into the projects itself. And then from the beginning, so as an example, if you look at historically, Indonesia has had in the past 10 years a very a good acceleration of infrastructure projects, right? So how do we have a second wave of financing? Is because now the investors are also interested in knowing that the projects that they do are socially responsible, or at least it wouldn't come back to them 10 years after with problems, right? So by design, investors, they need that assurance that the projects now need to be designed with all these standards, these new standards that are being developed that Pa Eri mentioned. So the standards will be the unifying lingua franca. So be it if you're a project developer or you're an investor, you speak the same language in terms of clear standards. And those standards, I believe, for instance, for gender lens investing also, is being developed currently by World Bank, IFC, etc. And I know that they're also working together with Ministry of Finance. So if that standard is there, the whole ecosystem follows. It's a matter of how we disseminate this knowledge quickly. So this is where collaborations through all these speakers, through everyone, it's a call of action where everybody needs to know these standards and have these projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Pa Eri, please. But if you could keep it brief, that would be great.
Okay. Actually, for us, we are a very pragmatic institution with regard to the bond issuance. We do have a target volume and then target cost. So as long as the thematic bond can fall into our target volume and cost, then basically we are okay to issue the bonds, whatever color it is.
Great, thank you for that. All that's left to do now is ask IIF, when are you issuing orange bond? And the same thing to SMI. When are you issuing the orange bond? So, and I hope the answer is very soon. With that, a big thank you to all the panelists, a very engaging discussion with very precise call to action and recommendations. And I thank you for your insights and for your time. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Priyank and panelists. That was a fantastic session and really focused on actually how we can create some bonds in the market and use infrastructure as a tool for development.